tonight we have a really special opportunity because we have a special guest who hasn't been with us the rest of the trip. This is Philip Goldberg. He's well known for his book, American Veda, and it's a wonderful overview of how Vedic thought and literature come into the West. I'm going to use it as one of the textbooks in one of the classes at the college next fall. We're going to do an American history from a perspective of consciousness shift course, and this will be a big part of it. But tonight, thinking that Phil was going to be here, I thought let's have a discussion about Vedic education and its future in the West. So that's our topic tonight, because obviously this college is part of that tradition, and we can go into more depth on that. But Phil also has a background. He helped start another institution in the United States, Maharishi University, and that's also based on these principles. So it seemed like a very rich opportunity to discuss these things. And I thought I'd ask Phil to speak first about his thoughts on Vedic education.
Thanks. I'm very happy to be here and to discover this neighborhood. I've been living in LA for 30 years. I had no idea it existed. You'll have to pardon me, I'm at the end of a cold, so I'm a little congested. Had I known I was going to be asked to define Vedic education, I would have called upon my vast list of scholars that I consult with on occasions like this, because there's probably something somewhere in the literature about classic Vedic education. I would take the core truths, the universal ideas and principles that have come from that tradition, that mostly the ideas and concepts we think of as Vedanta, the Vedanta philosophy, and the methodologies of the yoga tradition. And I would adapt them to Western education. So that you had a science of the interior of life, as well as to complement and balance what the West has done so well, which is direct our gaze outward, mainly through science and objective scholarship, to analyze the phenomenal universe of material existence, and in all of its splendor and nuance and particulars. The East gives us an equally rigorous and deep and profound science and scholarship of the interior of our lives, of consciousness. And this would, to me, do, well, at least two things that I could probably think of more. But one is it would be at least the beginning of a science of human development, because if you're not developing the inner person in the context of education, you're just not doing your job. And developing the inner person in the Western context has meant feed them information, give them what we think of as knowledge. But if you don't do something about what that knowledge is going into, their brains, their minds, their hearts, their consciousness, to make the container bigger and better, then a lot of that effort is wasted. It's for naught. It's just stuff. Garbage in, garbage out. So it gives not just a knowledge of what human consciousness is and what its capabilities are, but methodologies for actually refining, expanding, and developing consciousness so that the student's inner life can take full advantage of the educational, the traditional educational qualities. That's how I would sort of summarize.
So, going on the student side, I thought I would ask just for some ideas of what's your experience been in this, what you just so well described. How does it come across in daily activities, daily studies, etc., at a place like Ananda College? So maybe you want to start?
Yeah, sure. I'll first start by saying that I was always, ever since I was a child, just a very inwardly oriented person. I was never interested really in the outward things, like a lot of my peers were interested in, like going out and partying or material things. But all of my interest was geared inwardly, and so it was very dissatisfying when I would study things in school. Say something like math. I've always had a difficult time at math, but the issue was not how can I learn how to do this math problem, but how can I overcome the interior block I have with math? How do I work with my consciousness? How do I work with my magnetism or my energy so that I can do math better? Same thing with sports. I played sports when I was a kid and I was horrible. And I was like, physically obviously I'm not very built, but it was more of the feeling, like my consciousness doesn't feel right when I'm playing soccer. It doesn't feel coherent, my energy is off, I don't feel focused, I don't feel centered. And if I could attain, and the few times that I was fortunately able to stumble into those centered states, I played extremely well. And I said, well, it would be wonderful if I really found a way to be able to get in that state of mind every time, because that would improve every area of my life. And it's funny because, at Ananda College, such an emphasis is placed on the interior life. Not only in class assignments, but also just the environment really supports inner development. That includes things like meditating and traditional yoga practices, but also so many of the assignments are very self-reflective. And we're really encouraged to meditate on these topics or concepts we're learning, develop insight, gain wisdom, and then share it in class and have a discussion. And in doing so, we really become inwardly mindful of our inner processes and how they are affecting our outer reality. And I can speak for myself. My athletic performance, even though physically I'm probably declining at the old age of 21, my athletic performance has improved greatly. Things like playing basketball is way better than when I was playing every day when I was 16, just because I learned how to stay focused and be centered. My ability to do homework has greatly increased because I've learned to not try, if I'm doing something creative like writing, I'm not writing from my ego. I'm not trying to force something. I've learned to be receptive and to let something write through me. And that is just, you can't really teach that in a regular school. You don't have a class on intuitive flow, bliss 101. Except at Ananda. So by emphasizing consciousness and consciousness in education, once we are able to become comfortable in attaining that level of mindfulness, concentration, and centeredness, and almost like attunement, receptivity to what's moving through us, and being able to express that can easily just be applied to every area of life, and every area of life can improve so much. And this is what I've seen in every area of my relationships, my public speaking, hopefully. My every academic, I've become not smarter, but my sense of intuitive insight into different topics has deepened because of consciousness or Vedic-based education. Whereas before I had more broad linear knowledge. I had read a lot of books, I memorized a lot of facts, but my depth or insight or ability to make an interconnection was not as developed as it is now. And I feel so much wiser from receiving this education. Not only more book knowledge, but also that depth and wisdom that I've gained from being here.
Thank you.
So anybody else want to comment on how it going to college has affected them in these directions? Yeah, please.
A couple of things I was thinking of while you're speaking. I've been talking a lot recently about, while I've been finishing up my yoga teacher training certificate, I've realized how lucky I am to have completed this certificate in a place where I'm submerged in the philosophies of yoga. A lot of people take a yoga training class in a very short amount of time, and maybe just at a community center or something like this, where it's kind of disjointed from what the philosophy is. And although there are philosophy requirements, you just take in that knowledge and you get your certificate and you go and you get your cool yoga clothes and you are really cool. Whereas being able to be at this college and do it, I was surrounded by a community of people who are living that, who are doing yoga every day, at least once a day, and who not only do the physical hatha yoga, but are also following karma yoga and jnana yoga and all of the different aspects of yoga which we get to learn and incorporate in almost every subject at our school. So having this holistic way of learning yogic philosophy, as well as any other philosophy we care to endeavor into, which has been great. I've been really free to explore that, even though the people around me are on a specific path. So that is one thing that was really beneficial, as well as in many other talks I've been pointing out that I was also blessed to be able to kind of have a comparison, because I went to a college before this college, as many of us did, and didn't enjoy myself there. And what I found at the last college that I attended was that the curriculum was very disjointed. I was taking sustainable business, and it was basically, these are your business classes, these are your environmental study classes. And there was no connection between the two, and there was no compost pile, and there was no experiential learning at all. I didn't do any farming or anything. I just read books, and it didn't really feel like I was learning how to embody that, how to actually go out into the world and be able to say, I know how to build a permaculture-related farm, or I've seen how a water system works, or things like this. And although I didn't go into sustainable business with Ananda College, I feel as though I learned a lot more about living sustainably just because I was submerged in a community which is starting up right now in a sustainable way. So being able to go to a college which has these philosophies in place, has this community in place, and is teaching from a holistic point of view has been such a blessing. I'm so grateful.
Anybody else want to chime in at this point?
I could share something.
Yeah.
Talking about the Vedic philosophy as it applies to Western education is something that's really dear. It's really in my heart because, I'm in the EFL program, and I think I have to give a little bit of backstory to go into this subject. But basically, I've been on a search, for as long as I can remember, and that search has been for happiness, and I just have always known that's what I've been looking for. And I tried a lot of the traditional ways that people do that. Right out of high school, I just went straight into the work world, and college at that time didn't interest me because there was just nothing that was really, that I could see that would bring me happiness. There was nothing that was really exciting or deep that I felt could challenge me. And so I went into the work world, and fortunately I had a father who was pretty deeply spiritual, and he always encouraged us that we could do anything we wanted in life. And so I felt that, and I really believed that. And so I started doing art, and I started making movies, and which was my passion. And so I just really went full into that, and I just watched as my friends at the same time went into their third, fourth year. Some of them still hadn't figured out even what they wanted to do in their fourth year. And a lot of my friends after their 4th year decided they wanted to do something completely different, so they started a new degree. And I have some friends who have gone 7, 8 years, and it's not even something they're really interested in. And so I continued on with film, and I started to get some success in the world. I started to have film screenings, independent theaters, and art shows, and things like that. And sort of the climax of my 20s, mid-20s, I was about 24, 25, my beginning of my adult life was I had worked 2 years on a film project, put everything into it. Me and my brother worked on it together, and we were outside after the film had screened at this independent theater to this big audience, and we had people interviewing us, and I was outside, and I was wearing this beautiful gown, and my brother was in a tuxedo, and I was smoking a cigarette, and we had done the screening, and I was just like, oh my God, this is like so empty. Like, I just felt this incredible emptiness, and I was like, I can't continue on my life like this. Like, for me, that was like the epitome of success at that point. Like, for that age, I was like, this is the worldly success I thought was going to bring me what I wanted. And so I decided right after that I needed to find what would bring me happiness. And I started my search, and the first time I've ever tasted happiness has been from the Vedic teachings, and that has come through my beloved guru, Yogananda, and I found Ananda shortly after that. So this leads me to now, which is I found EFL, and it's like finding EFL is finding my dharma, which is something I've just been realizing throughout this tour, is that my happiness has been looking for my dharma, and EFL really is the first thing that struck me in such a profound way, because the teachings of EFL are Yogananda, based on, for me, I see them as Yogananda's How to Live schools is where the original idea for these EFL teachings came from. That's my perspective. You might have another idea from it, Nitai, but...
No, I agree.
So for me, like, the epitome of education was when I read Yogananda's autobiography of a yogi and read about these schools that he started where nature, meditation, Vedic knowledge was all incorporated to give these students this well-rounded education. And I was like, this is it. Like, this is what we need in the West, So Swami Kriyananda so brilliantly attuned to his guru and took Master's Yogananda, I call him Master's teachings, and applied them into a Western education system. And what I love is how they describe, like, for example, the gunas from the Vedic teachings, Sattva, Rajas, and Tamas. They describe it in EFL as ego active, light, and heavy. I'm still in my first year, so I'm not have this all figured out yet, but it's just so brilliant because these ancient Vedic teachings and philosophies have been applied in this just everyday sort of usable, workable system here, and I've just got to witness so many just amazing young people, especially young kids, like at the Living Wisdom schools. They're so comfortable in themselves, and that's something that I've always really wanted, is just to feel comfort in myself and feel comfortable as myself. And I feel like the Dharma, to be able to help kids learn to know themselves and be themselves, is just an incredible blessing. And one of my goals actually is to be able to bring film and art into a school, maybe an LA school. And
Amen.
You got the congregation with you now.
I mean, kids now, maybe in 10 years ago, it'd be in your 20s that you should start learning about film or art or things you're interested in. But kids now, I think 11, 12, 13, they're already so brilliant. And if we can start, honing these skills, these natural talents and abilities they have at a young age, using these spiritual principles, these are incredible people we're bringing into the world. And I feel education is going to make one of the biggest impacts in our world right now. So I'm just totally psyched up, as you can tell.
How many of you live in LA in the shadow of the film business and know people 3 times their age, and you're waiting for them to have the same revelation?
Maybe we could follow up on that. You brought up a very powerful Vedic principle, dharma. And I don't know if it's fair to put it in your lap and say, how do you think dharma fits into things?
I don't know. Let me get a sense of the room. Is that a strange word to any of you? Dharma? It's usually, it's D-H-A-R-M-A, dharma. And it's usually translated sloppily as duty. And some people isolate it to your calling in the world, which technically speaking would be just one little aspect of dharma. Another way of looking at it, and the way I favor, is dharma is that which supports the life and the development and flow of existence, individually and culturally and planetarily and cosmically. So each of us has personal dharma, which could be sort of narrowed into what is our calling in life, what is our occupation, what are we meant to do, you hear people say. And that's how most people use it in everyday terms. I'm searching for my dharma. What am I meant to do? What am I meant to accomplish in this life or contribute? But the larger sense has to do with doing actions in the world that support not only your own spiritual growth and evolution, but that of the larger whole that you're part of. And so that your spiritual practice is part of doing your dharma, doing right action in the world, right livelihood, right relationship. All these are different. The rituals of different traditions might be dharmic in the right time and place and so forth. And that's a very good point to bring it up in this context, because to me, come to think of it, a proper education should have young people find their way into their natural state, their natural existence, their dharma. So they come into adulthood prepared to live the rest of their lives in harmony with and consistent with their own personal dharma, the dharma of their group, the dharma of their culture, and make a contribution in that way to the life-sustaining, life-supporting evolution of things. Does that kind of make sense?
Can I throw something?
Yeah.
I first heard dharma defined as right action, and I really like that definition, because as soon as you define dharma as right action, you have to define what is right action and figure out that for yourself, and kind of working with that idea, what is right and how should you act on what is right, brings up a really a big topic. That's right. What's right?
Anybody else have any comments on the dharmic experience? Yes, Brooke.
Well, what I learned in that is not just finding one thing that you can do your whole life, but finding the purpose and meaning in what you're doing at that moment. And possibly making that your dharma, making it the best thing you could be doing at that moment. And that what it does is it brings joy. It brings joy into whatever you're doing, and enthusiasm. The professors actually bring that along with them, that joy and enthusiasm, and you watch them and you see how they do it. And then before you know it, you start emulating what they're doing. In that, learning about Dharma, knowing that, well, maybe it was a mistake, or I thought it was a mistake that I joined the military. I thought the military is a horrible thing. What was I doing? Oh, I'm such a bad person. Bad me. And I figured, no, this was my Dharma. It was my Dharma at the time to experience that. So I could say, I don't want war. I do not want war. I know it does not work. I've been there. And so I had to learn the hard way. But it became my Dharma because what I like to do is help people find themselves and help them find a way to heal themselves, to complete themselves. That's what a lot of people on earth to do, to heal what I've learned are called samskaras, things that you bring with you or that even have caused heartache and pain in this lifetime. And with that is veterans with me. It's kind of like I joined a little club of the people who are so splintered that they don't know what to do with themselves at the moment. And so part of my Dharma is going to be helping them, hopefully. And the school is supporting me. You know, the Ananda College is like, yeah, we'll support you, whatever you want to do. But you come up with the program. You make the phone calls. You make the contacts. You network. So you know how to do it. You know what you're doing. And then you're well on your way by the time we, boot you out the door, which they're not going to really, but, you've got to...
Set you free.
Yeah, set me free again. For, the third time already? So I'm going on my third dharmic duty, and putting it all together and just making it come into one. And it's really exciting, like Clarity said, it's really exciting to just find something that lights you up and make a contribution to the world, to your own little niche. And what happened was I found a little niche that you wouldn't think, looking at me, that I would really fit in. But those big, tough veterans, Vietnam War veterans, hearts as big as this, bigger than the earth. And for some reason, little old me can reach right into that heart, and they welcome me. They say, welcome, sister, and it's amazing. It's amazing to see their faces, and I've had some experiences where they're healing, and from other people doing their dharmic duty, and it's just amazing to see how it all goes around when you kind of fit in that little piece of the world. And I know I wouldn't have stumbled upon this or understood it in the way that I do, because I have a different understanding possibly than each and every one of you of how it works. But in my own mind and soul, that's how it works for me. So, yeah,
can I just add something to this notion of Dharma? Because very often when we talk about Dharma, it sounds like a cognitive process of discovering right action or what you should do. And there is that element of it. And in the Vedic tradition, there's the equivalent of codes of what is proper Dharma for these people in this circumstance and so forth. That, of course, always have to be adapted to different time periods. But the deeper meaning of Dharma brings you back to this science of consciousness aspect of Vedic tradition, where the interior methodologies of consciousness growth attune you not just to your individual self, but to the larger environment that we're all part of. And so they're part of acting in a dharmic way becomes kind of automatic and intuitive and something one does without the intervention necessarily of having to decide or look up what is right action at this moment. That's part of the science of consciousness, is to tune you to the universal dharma of cosmic intelligence, so your actions are guided. from that level.
Can I throw something cool out? I was thinking, like, we're talking about macro dharma, what you're going to do with your life, what you're going to do in the world, moving out. There's also, I kind of think of it as like micro dharma. You know, you have a cupcake and you have a carrot, and you have to decide which one you're going to eat. And it kind of goes along with what Phil was saying, is like you trust your intuition, because there are times when the carrot is definitely what you need. You know, health-wise and fulfillment-wise, and like that carrot is great. But there are other times when you just need a cupcake, and you know that that is the right action to take. So.
And then you get the recipe for carrot cupcake.
And then life on Earth is complete.
You know, we've talked a lot about the consciousness education, the Vedic blah 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 can help you with this, but let's get really practical and really specific for a minute here. And as this ties in with Vedic education and with Dharma, there's something called the Vedic sciences, and this includes things like Ayurveda, which is the traditional healing system from India, which comes from Vedic teachings. Something like the teachings of yoga, both the practices of yoga or psychophysical exercises to help raise energy and evolve your consciousness, and the psychological or philosophical component of yoga, or Raja Yoga, which is more understanding the mind, understanding our mental processes and how we relate to reality. There's things like Vedic astrology, which is a science of how to, relate to different planetary forces which comprise our particular constitution. There's something Vastu, which is like the Vedic way of how to organize your home so it's most in harmony with the environment, and to use your home as a way to channel in beneficial energies. And all of these sciences are basically sciences of Dharma. Vedic astrology is the Dharma of how to live in time, because we need to time certain events that correlate well with the stars. Ayurveda is the Dharma of how to live in harmony with nature and how to live in harmony with your particular body type, with your environment and the foods you eat. Yoga is a Dharma of how to work with your consciousness, or Dharma of your own spiritual practice. And we can go further and say Karma Yoga or whatever is the Dharma of service. So all of these specific topics are trying to tune you into some kind of a dharmic flow in your life. And it's one thing to just have a concept of Dharma and try to arbitrarily apply it. Say, is this Dharma? Is this Dharma? But when you have all these really practical tools to get you into that dharmic flow, it just makes things so much easier. And I think the greatest benefit of Vedic education is that it not only emphasizing consciousness, but we can, like at Maharishi University or at Ananda College, we are teaching these Vedic sciences. We teach Ayurveda, how to live with your body type in harmony with nature. We can teach yoga psychology, yoga philosophy, and it's they're extreme. The best thing about all of these is they've fulfilled all of my intellectual curiosity, because I found what resonated most with me, but also they're the most practical things I've ever studied. There's so many philosophies out there, or systems of health, medicine, physical exercise that are good, but either A, they lack a spiritual component, or B, they're not very practical. But every single one of these Vedic sciences that tune us into Dharma are the most practical things I've ever come across in my life, which is why I just love it so much.
How has Ayurveda affected your life? Like, I know Ayurveda and all these practices.
Sure. Okay, this is great. So, I like to think of someone who may be suffering from severe anxiety or depression. You can go to a psychotherapist and you can talk for years and years of psychotherapy or psychoanalysis, and people may not change or grow at all. And we're, in cases of some, let's say, anxiety, we're very worked up, nervous, our hearts are beating really fast, and there's nothing we can really do to stop. With Ayurveda, we can understand that that's an imbalance of the wind element called Vata. You can put on warm clothes, put on sesame oil, do a calming yoga exercise, and within 2 minutes you can instantly feel better. Whereas people can spend years talking to a psychotherapist about their anxiety and not make any improvement. That's one example.
You just open the window and maybe it'll
That's part of it. I wanted to ask Marty for a second, just from your experience, What's the difference in how it feels between having what we'll call a Vedic or a dharmic emphasis on your education and being in an educational style that didn't have those aspects to it? What was your, how did you?
Well, I would say it's a lot. Well, everyone basically said it. I'm going to be repeating everyone else that it's really inward and really supportive. So the teachers are always there for you, and it's just really spiritual. And yeah, I mean, everyone perfectly said it.
Okay, well, what I was trying to get at was like, I know from your background you were at different schools, different colleges, junior colleges.
Yeah.
And I just was trying to get, what was your experience as a student in those situations? How did it feel, and how was it different from what you might have gotten the last couple of years at this college?
I would say it's a support. That's sort of the point.
Okay,
Yeah.
good. So, if there are any questions, you feel free to jump in and ask them. But I thought the last topic I wanted to get into is the future of the Vedic education in the United States in terms of what would it look like? What would it look like if we had a society that started to incorporate these principles into the education, not only of a small minority of people who went way out of their way to try to find it, but if it just started to, if you went to UCLA and you had that people getting trained in that style of living, any thoughts about how it might change?
Well, it's interesting because it's easy to be idealistic and say, well, this is the world would change, and of course it would. I mean, that goes without saying. These teachings change individual lives, and so if you instituted in an institutional setting and raise children and educate children and young adults with these principles and practices, they would change, and by extension, we all have a happier planet. I mean, that's kind of, and a more sustainable, more harmonious planet. And it's easy to say that, and I hope we all live to see it. But there's another level in which, when you say, what will it look like, I don't know what the answer to that is, because, and this may not be what you're at, you may be content with the larger picture of the world will be a better place. But how it will play out is the kind of question that I always hesitate to answer, because the whole history of the transmission of these teachings into our lives has been surprising, and it takes new forms all the time. Who would have predicted 50 years ago that there would be this yoga studios on every street corner in every city? Who would have predicted 10 years ago that 3,000 people would be coming to Bhakti Fest in September to do kirtan 24 hours a day? And I mean, the forms that it will take can be surprising. The intention to introduce the Vedic sciences and the Vedic technologies of consciousness into our lives can take the form of Ananda College, but it takes other forms too. So you find elements of it at the California Institute of Integral Studies in San Francisco, or at the Institute for Transpersonal Psychology, or in Fairfield, Iowa, at the Maharishi schools, or maybe even, since you brought it up, at UCLA in their mindfulness clinic and research center. maybe in psychology classes, maybe in religion classes. So these teachings have filtered into institutional life and into educational practices. Not everybody's going to go to an Ananda school. Not everybody's going to go to a school that is explicitly set up to incorporate Vedic education into the curriculum or into the school design. But pieces of it will find its way into medical schools, into psychological training, into departments of religion, into history departments, and so on and so on and so forth. This is a critical piece of it, and should not be underestimated while you're busy deciding whether to encourage your kids to go to Ananda College, which you all should. At the same time, your other kid might say, you know what, I want to go to medical school, I'm going to USC, but they may find, surprisingly, elements of this there. And even at USC, the dean of religious life at USC is an American-born guy of Hindu descent. He's the first Hindu head of a chaplaincy program at a major university. And so there's a lot going on that can promote and hasten the vision of a different kind of world and a different kind of education. And so I would want to bring that element. Some of the graduates here shall go and bring some of this into the veterans, the world of veterans. Some of them will go into, maybe you'll make better movies and more conscious movies. Maybe you'll teach film. Who knows? I mean, where some of these people will end up. And that's the kind of sort of infiltration and adaptation of these teachings that is a critical element of the whole story. But so I just wanted to bring that piece of it in.
Yeah. Okay.
I love that answer, Phil. I think that's an incredible way of looking at it. And can I ask a question?
Please.
Is that okay? Okay. So I have a question for you, Nitai, and Phil. You might want to answer, and also open it up to the audience as well too, which is one of my feelings is that of course we're here talking about Ananda College, and Education for Life is an incredible education, but like we were saying, you know, there's so many other schools out there, and there's so many people in even public education that, you know, would love to have these kinds of principles out more in the mainstream. And as much as, I mean, Yogananda is my teacher, and I'm taking Education for Life, I'm really interested in how can this be brought out in more of an expansive way to include more people other than people who just know about Ananda or happen to, you know, search this way of life out. How can these teachings be applied in maybe just a small seed form, or does anyone have any thoughts on that? Because it's something I'm really interested in.
Well, one of the things that I think will seep into the culture is, just like Vibhaka was saying, these teachings are incredibly practical. They make people function better in anything. We have this testing program in our high school, which is basically a national standardized test to see how people do in comparison to other high schools around the country. And consistently for the last 10 years, our high schools have been in the top 10% of schools in the whole country. Last year they were in the top 1%. Now, what that says is interesting, because we don't emphasize academics. We don't even spend as much time on it as we do in a regular public school.
Can I throw something out?
Yes.
When I first got to the school in 8th grade, I was intensely academic. And I walked in, I was like, you have English class twice a week. And math class, 3 days a week, sorry, right, 3 days a week. And math class 3 days a week. I was like, you only do 3 hours of math? How do you learn math? And then we do so well. I learned more math in that year. It just went so fast.
Yeah.
It's great.
So if you learn how to center yourself and you learn how to focus your concentration, you get a heck of a lot more done in a lot less time than if you're sitting there, all this stuff dragging your mind this way and that, or you're depressed and you just have to struggle to make yourself do anything. You're doing it with enthusiasm. Everybody knows that. If you do something with enthusiasm, you do it really well. You just shine. And that ties back into the whole dharma thing too. But when you're in touch with that flow of dharma, you have enthusiasm. And these tools can help you do that. So I just think it's going to come in on that way because as the world just kind of clinks and grinds to a halt in some ways, it seems like what's happening a lot to the traditional educational system, people start looking for, there's got to be a better way. I mean, in San Francisco, I think it's the whole district has implemented a centering activities as part of the school day, just because they found a lesson to cut the dropout rate. So it kind of speaks in very bottom line kind of ways. Or if you can show that your test scores go up, I mean, God, that's the nirvana for.
There are a good deal of data about some of this now as well. And don't forget cutting down on substance abuse, which is a big factor in especially high school and college education.
And at the other end of the spectrum, you have countries that are pushing even harder to cram in this knowledge, get those top scores, and you find suicide rates going up. Kids are just completely lost in life, or they're it's just horrible things are happening because of the imbalance in the ways that are dying out. So I think it's going to come in those ways. Can't try to answer your question, Claire.
Yeah.
If I could share something, I think the other thing that comes to my mind is that in this age that we're in of energy and technology and the world getting smaller and smaller, probably maybe one of you or someone else at the school will figure out a way to start like a webinar or some sort of interactive thing that can go just people anywhere in the world, where it's sort of like you take some of these practical things, and it will probably be like 10 ways to, learn better, the way that everything is now, right? The list of 10 things that everybody goes for it, and putting it into that kind of that model, and people will find it, and they'll learn some little bit, like what Nitai is saying. So I think using the ways that information is getting out there, and there are so many ways.
Yes. Definitely. Good idea.
And you're a filmmaker.
Definitely. Love it.
Anybody else have a question for anybody? Or a comment?
Yeah, I got a question.
Yeah.
What is the basic, most simple basic process of an education for life? I mean, imagine it's for the whole life. So when can you start bringing these things into a kid's life, like concentration and willpower, and then
it starts right from birth. I've had 4-year-olds. This one story, this little girl, we've been talking about being centered as opposed to being nervous and tension-filled. And so this little 4-year-old girl, she's sitting there on a bench outside at recess, and this little boy comes running up to her and says, "Come on, let's go play ball." And she just looks at her and says, "I'd better stay quiet and calm right now." So it's a conscious choice she's making at 4 years old to choose a higher, calmer state of awareness. And they get it, on that level, they get it really vibrationally almost, really easily. I know one, anyway, it happens at a very early age. And you can, as some of you, Barty and the others who have been working with young kids, I mean, what happens in the classroom that has anything to do with this?
I have one story that I'm not taking EFL. I have taken a couple of the classes, which has been great. But recently, a friend of mine designed a garden on the campus that was in the shape of a flower of life, a seed of life. And she was kind of opening it for the season and wanted people to come and bless the garden and share with it. And we had the Living Wisdom School kids from the elementary happen to be there that day, and they wanted to see the garden, and they were learning about decomposing bugs and things like this that day, so it was perfect to have them come check out the garden. And so Tonya, the woman who built the garden, she led them through a song, and then they all did a nice om for the garden. And one of the kids, she was so cute, she said, "I can't, the energy is still coming out of my hands." And the whole time she's walking away from the garden, she's keeping her hands in the garden. It was so cute. She must have been 5 or 6 years old. It was just, I can't imagine.
7. Bro.
Yeah.
Yeah, they come in and they don't have the filters that we picked up as we were growing up in this culture, and they just relate to things like energy, light, joy, and it just kind of is, boom, just they're there because nobody's told them it can't be there, and so it's very exciting to work with young people this way. Anybody else want to share from that perspective?
Guardian doesn't
Yeah, I was thinking of one where I had to substitute teach for a week at the Living Wisdom School in Portland, and throughout the year I was doing an internship, and one of the big points of EFL is the teacher's job is to change inwardly rather than go and try to change students, and that way the students will receptively catch on to that. So I was going into this week ready for the typical substitute. We all remember being in public school and there's a substitute. We're like, yes! Party! And I'm like, okay, I need to be strong, authoritative, none of that. And I just go in there and they were so polite. we were going to play hangman. One of the girls goes up there and I let her lead the class. And some of the boys are messing around. She's like, "Excuse me, I'm not going to start until everyone is quiet." And she was 8. And if I was in that position, I would have been like, "Everybody please be quiet!" And it's just, I was amazed. That whole week when I would go home, I was learning so much. I was writing notes about, this 8th grader taught me how to, be centered. And it's so true. They teach us so much. And I have too many stories. I'll tell them if you ask me later.
Okay, so that's our introduction to Vedic education.
Beautiful. Thank you.